The sterile, recycled air of the airport terminal hummed with a low-grade anxiety. For two ambitious executives, Liam and Chloe, this was the final hurdle before a career-defining pitch in San Francisco. They stood sharp and tailored at the front of the priority boarding line, radiating an aura of importance. But when a woman in a simple fleece jacket and worn hiking boots stepped forward, her boarding pass clearly marked Group 1. Their carefully constructed world of entitlement was challenged. With a sneer, Liam blocked her path. "Ma'am," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "I think you're mistaken. This isn't priority boarding for just anyone." He had no idea he wasn't just talking to another passenger. He was talking to the woman who held his entire career in the palm of her hand. The Denver International Airport was a river of humanity, its currents flowing around islands of plastic chairs and glowing screens. Catherine Vance felt blessedly anonymous in the stream. Her faded North Face fleece, a relic from a dozen mountain treks, and her scuffed but comfortable Merrill boots were a far cry from her usual boardroom attire. She'd just spent 4 days in a small Colorado town with her aging mother, a precious, disconnected time of quiet conversations and shared meals. The trip was a necessary reset, a reminder of the world that existed outside of quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. Now, returning to her life in San Francisco, she felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling back onto her shoulders. Her phone, a simple company-issued device she rarely used for personal matters, remained tucked away. She preferred to observe. The gate for Flight 821 to SFO was a microcosm of society. Tired families trying to corral sugar-fueled children, nervous solo travelers checking their watches, and the distinct tribe she knew all too well, the business warriors. 2 of them stood sentinel at the head of the priority Group 1 lane, which had just been announced. A man and a woman, both in their late 20s or early 30s, dressed in the unspoken uniform of corporate ambition. The man, tall with aggressively styled dark hair and a suit that looked expensive even from 20 feet away, was Liam. The woman, Chloe, had a severe blonde bob and a trench coat draped over her shoulders like a cape. They spoke in low, urgent tones, radiating an energy that repelled anyone from getting too close. They were a matched set of sharp angles and sharper ambition. Catherine clutched her simple canvas carry-on and her boarding pass. The Group 1 was not a perk she'd asked for, but a standard booking detail arranged by her executive assistant. It meant little to her beyond a slightly shorter wait. As the gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system, inviting first class and Group 1 passengers to board, Catherine moved forward. She stepped behind Chloe, waiting her turn, when Liam turned his eyes sweeping over Catherine's casual attire with undisguised disdain. He nudged Chloe, who turned and mirrored his expression, a quick, dismissive up-and-down glance that was meant to sting. "Excuse me," Liam said, his voice smooth but firm, not making eye contact with her, but rather addressing a point on the wall just over her head. "I think you might be in the wrong line." Catherine blinked, assuming a simple misunderstanding. "Pardon?" she asked, her voice calm. "This is the priority boarding lane." Chloe chimed in her tone, even more condescending than Liam's. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the sign, as if Catherine were illiterate. "Group 1, for our premier status flyers and first-class passengers." Catherine held up her boarding pass, the text clearly visible. "Yes, I'm in Group 1. Liam finally looked at her, a smirk playing on his lips. He leaned in conspiratorially toward Chloe, speaking in a stage whisper that was deliberately loud enough for Catherine and everyone nearby to hear. Someone must have gotten a lucky upgrade, probably her first time out of coach. A few people in the adjacent Group 2 line shuffled uncomfortably. Catherine felt a familiar, quiet spark of annoyance, but she tamped it down. Reacting was what they wanted. It was a power play, a way to affirm their own status by diminishing hers. She'd seen this behavior countless times in boardrooms and break rooms. It was the petty territorialism of the insecure. She decided to ignore the jibe. "I'm in the right place," she repeated, her voice, betraying no emotion. This seemed to irritate Liam even more. He physically shifted, half blocking her path to the scanner. "Ma'am," he said, the honorific now sounding like an insult. "With all due respect, people like us pay a significant amount of money or fly hundreds of thousands of miles a year for this privilege. It's to ensure a smooth and efficient boarding process. It gets diluted when people who don't belong clog up the line." The sheer arrogance was breathtaking. People like us. The phrase hung in the air, thick with unearned superiority. Catherine looked at their faces, taut with self-importance, convinced of their place at the top of this tiny, temporary hierarchy. They weren't just being rude, they were performing. They were acting out the roles they believed their tailored suits and expensive shoes entitled them to. "And you've decided I don't belong, based on my jacket?" Catherine asked, her tone genuinely curious now. Chloe scoffed, pulling her phone out to pointedly check an email. "It's just common sense. This isn't priority boarding for just anyone." The gate agent, a harried-looking woman named Brenda, according to her name tag, glanced over, sensing a bottleneck. "Folks, please have your boarding passes ready to scan." Liam shot a final withering look at Catherine before turning to have his pass scanned. "Finally," he muttered to Chloe. As he passed through, he added, "Some people have important meetings to get to. We're pitching the Viridian Dynamics integration plan tomorrow." The name hit Catherine like a physical jolt. Viridian Dynamics, her company, the company she had just spent the last 6 months fighting to acquire, the company whose San Francisco headquarters she was flying to in order to personally oversee the final stages of that very integration. Liam and Chloe weren't just any arrogant business travelers. They were her employees, or more accurately, the employees of the massive tech firm her conglomerate Ethelred Holdings had officially purchased just 3 weeks ago. A slow, cold understanding washed over her. They didn't recognize her. Of course they didn't. The acquisition had been handled at the highest levels. Her public photo was a sterile black and white corporate headshot from 5 years ago. She was Catherine Vance, the CEO of Ethelred Holdings, a name that was likely just an abstract entity to mid-level project managers at a newly acquired subsidiary. To them, she wasn't the architect of their company's future. She was just an obstacle in a fleece jacket. Her annoyance evaporated, replaced by a chilling clarity. This was no longer a simple moment of airport rudeness. It was a data point, a deeply troubling one. She stepped forward and held her pass under the scanner. It beeped green. "Enjoy your flight, Ms. Vance." Brenda, the gate agent, said, her eyes flicking from Catherine's pass back to her face, a flicker of professional recognition in her gaze that Liam and Chloe had utterly missed. Catherine gave a small appreciative nod. As she walked down the jet bridge, she could feel Liam and Chloe's eyes on her back. She didn't look back. The game had changed. This was no longer about priority boarding. It was about the culture of the company she had just paid $14 billion for. And she was about to get a front row seat. The hushed atmosphere of the business class cabin was a world away from the chaotic energy of the gate. Catherine found her seat 3B, an aisle seat in the 3rd row. As she settled in, stowing her simple carry-on in the overhead bin, she heard their voices again. "Can you believe the nerve of some people?" It was Chloe, her voice a sharp whisper that still managed to cut through the cabin's quiet hum. Liam, who was settling into seat 2D across the aisle, grunted in agreement. "Tell me about it. Probably used her mum's frequent flyer miles. No way she earned that status herself. Catherine slid into her seat, pulling out a well-worn paperback from her jacket pocket. She deliberately angled herself away, hoping they might simply forget about her. No such luck. Their proximity, a cruel twist of fate in the airline's seating algorithm, had turned her flight into an unwilling ethnographic study. A flight attendant approached Liam and Chloe, offering pre-departure beverages. They both ordered champagne, their voices loud and performative, ensuring everyone around them knew they were partaking in the complimentary bubbly. When the attendant came to Catherine, she simply asked for a water. She saw Chloe shoot a glance at Liam, a small, triumphant smirk exchanged between them. "See not one of us." The plane pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway. Liam and Chloe, emboldened by the champagne and the perceived validation of their status, started talking business, and they weren't quiet about it. "So Marcus is happy with the deck?" Chloe asked, pulling a sleek, company-branded laptop from a leather briefcase. Thorne ecstatic. Liam boasted, leaning across the aisle to be heard better. He said, "If we nail this Viridian pitch, the senior director roles are practically ours. He's clearing the path for us." Catherine's ears perked up. Marcus Thorne. She knew that name. He was the executive vice president of West Coast operations for Viridian Dynamics, now technically under her purview. He was the man responsible for leading the integration from their side. He was, in effect, Liam and Chloe's boss's boss. "He better be," Chloe said, a hard edge to her voice. "We've basically done all the work. The way we managed to trim the fat from the Project Chimera budget was genius." Liam chuckled. Genius is one word for it. Shaving 5% off the top of the materials budget and reallocating it to consulting fees was a masterstroke. No one in accounting will ever notice. Catherine froze her hand, hovering over the page of her book. Project Chimera. That was the codename for a critical R&D initiative, developing a new proprietary semiconductor. It was one of the crown jewels of Viridian, a key factor in Ethelred Holdings' valuation of the company, and they were openly admitting to falsifying the budget, shaving from materials the most critical part of an R&D project to line their own pockets, or at best to make their departmental numbers look better. This was no longer about arrogance. This was fraud. And the numbers for the Q3 projections, Chloe continued oblivious. "Are we still using the revised figures?" "Absolutely," Liam confirmed. "The ones Marcus told us to use. The optimistic set. The official ones from finance are too conservative. Ethelred wants to see growth potential, so we'll give them growth potential. We can course correct in Q4 after the integration is finalized, and we've got our promotions." Catherine felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. They were planning to present inflated, misleading projections to her, to the board of the parent company. Their own boss, Marcus Thorne, had instructed them to do it. It was a conspiracy to deliberately mislead the new ownership, a brazen act of professional malpractice designed for personal gain. The disrespect they had shown her at the gate was a symptom of a much deeper disease, a culture of deceit, corner-cutting, and self-interest that seemed to permeate all the way up to the executive level. The plane took off, pressing Catherine back into her seat, but her mind was racing. Her annoyance at their personal insults had morphed into a profound sense of institutional betrayal. She had championed this acquisition. She had assured her board that Viridian Dynamics, despite its recent market struggles, had a solid foundation, a brilliant team, and a culture of innovation. She had staked her reputation on it. Now, listening to these two preen and boast about their deceptions, she realized the foundation might be rotten. For the rest of the 2-hour flight, she remained silent, a ghost in the aisle seat. She listened as they gossiped about colleagues, mocked a junior analyst's work ethic, and planned their celebratory dinner in San Francisco. They dropped names, projects, and budget lines with a carelessness that was staggering. They were so cocooned in their bubble of self-importance that the idea of consequences of being overheard by someone who mattered never entered their minds. They had judged Catherine as a nobody, and in doing so, had rendered her invisible. It was the most costly miscalculation of their lives. As the plane began its descent into San Francisco, Liam raised his glass of champagne, which had been diligently refilled by the flight attendant. "To us," he said to Chloe, loud enough for the front half of the cabin to hear. "To the future senior directors of Viridian Dynamics." Chloe clinked her glass against his. "And to the clueless suits at Ethelred Holdings, who are about to make us very, very rich." Catherine closed her book. She had heard more than enough. The view of the Golden Gate Bridge from her window was beautiful, but all she could see was the rot she would have to excise from the heart of her new company. Her trip to visit her mother had been a reset, all right. It had reset her priorities from integration to extermination. The jet bridge connected to the terminal with a gentle thud. The seatbelt sign pinged off, and instantly Liam and Chloe were on their feet, grabbing their expensive bags from the overhead compartments with an air of practiced urgency. They jostled their way into the aisle, eager to be the first to disembark, shooting one last dismissive glance toward Catherine, who remained seated patiently, waiting for the cabin to clear. To them, the story was over. They had put the fleece-clad woman in her place, enjoyed a luxurious flight, and were now striding confidently toward a future of promotions and prestige. They walked off the plane and into the bustling terminal of SFO, their eyes already scanning for the car service Marcus Thorne had promised them. Catherine waited another minute before gathering her simple bag and her coat. She walked slowly, deliberately down the jet bridge, her mind a cold, calculating machine. The emotional sting of their insults was long gone, replaced by the grim determination of a CEO facing a crisis. She wasn't Catherine, the weary traveler, anymore. She was Ms. Vance, the head of Ethelred Holdings, and she was about to go to work. As she stepped into the terminal, she saw them. Liam and Chloe were standing about 50 feet away, looking impatient. Liam was on his phone, likely texting their driver. Chloe was tapping her foot, scanning the crowd of arriving passengers with an annoyed expression. Then Catherine saw him too. Weaving through the crowd with purpose was a man in a sharp grey suit, David Chen, the chief operating officer of Viridian's entire West Coast division. He was second in command only to Marcus Thorne. Catherine knew him from several tense video conferences during the acquisition due diligence. He was sharp, professional, and known for his meticulous attention to detail. Liam's face lit up as he spotted David. He ended his call and nudged Chloe. "Look, it's not the car service. It's Chen. Marcus must have sent him personally to greet us. Talk about a red carpet rollout." Chloe straightened her trench coat, a pleased smile spreading across her face. "Of course, he knows how important this pitch is. We're his star players." They watched, chests puffed out, as David Chen strode directly toward them. His eyes were fixed, his pace unwavering. Liam put on his most charming professional smile, extending a hand in greeting. "David." "What a surprise. Great to see you," Liam said warmly. But David Chen's eyes went straight past him. They went past Chloe. His gaze was locked on the woman in the faded fleece jacket who had just stepped into the terminal behind them. David's entire demeanor shifted. The brisk professional walk softened into one of deep deference. A look of genuine respect, and perhaps a little awe, washed over his face. He completely ignored Liam's outstretched hand and came to a halt directly in front of Catherine Vance. "Ms. Vance." David said, his voice imbued with a reverence that stunned Liam and Chloe into silence. "Welcome to San Francisco. I hope your flight was comfortable. We are so honored to have you here in person." Catherine gave him a small, tired smile. "David, thank you for coming to meet me. That wasn't necessary." "Nonsense, Miss Vance," David insisted. "It's the least we could do. My car is waiting for you downstairs. We have the executive suite at the Fairmont prepared, and your schedule for tomorrow is cleared, just as you requested this morning." Liam's hand was still hanging awkwardly in the air. His smile had frozen, then melted from his face, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of utter confusion. Chloe's face had gone pale, the color draining from it, as if a plug had been pulled. Their eyes darted from the powerful COO fawning over this woman to the woman's worn-out hiking boots and back again. The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture of pure, unadulterated horror. Ms. Vance. The name echoed in the cavern of their skulls. Catherine Vance, the almost mythical CEO of Ethelred Holdings, the woman who signed the checks, the woman who owned their company, the woman whose name was on the acquisition papers, the woman they had mocked, insulted, and conspired in front of for the entire flight. Liam's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. Chloe looked as though she might be physically sick. The world had just tilted on its axis, and they were sliding off the edge. Catherine finally turned her attention to them. Her gaze was not fiery or angry. It was far worse. It was cold, flat, and impersonal, like a geologist examining a rock sample. She looked at Liam, then at Chloe, and the barest flicker of recognition crossed her face, as if recalling a minor nuisance. "Liam. Chloe," she said, her voice even and quiet, yet it carried the weight of absolute authority. "I believe we were on the same flight." Chloe swallowed hard, a small strangled sound escaping her throat. Miss Vance, we didn't... I had no idea." Liam, snapping out of his stupor, began to babble. "Ma'am, please, we are so terribly sorry. It was a misunderstanding. We were just joking around at the gate. We would never... If we had known it was you, that's the problem." Catherine cut in her voice, slicing through his pathetic excuses. "You shouldn't need to know who I am." She held their terrified gazes for a moment longer, before turning back to David Chen, dismissing them as completely as if they had ceased to exist. "David," she said, her tone shifting back to professional efficiency, "please have security escort these two to an empty conference room at the office. Have them surrender their laptops and company phones. Their building access is to be revoked immediately. They are on paid suspension, pending a full internal review." David Chen nodded, not batting an eye. He had clearly sensed the tension and understood that an order had been given. "Of course, Ms. Vance. Right away." Catherine looked at them one last time. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, pleading terror. It gave her no satisfaction, only a profound sense of disappointment. "We'll be in touch," she said. It was not a promise. It was a verdict. With that, she turned and walked away with David Chen, leaving Liam and Chloe standing frozen in the middle of the terminal, the ruins of their careers collapsing around them in silent, deafening dust. The ride from the airport to Viridian Dynamics' gleaming downtown headquarters was silent. David Chen, sensing Catherine's mood, drove with quiet efficiency, making no attempt at small talk. Catherine stared out the window at the passing cityscape, but she wasn't seeing it. She was replaying the conversation from the flight, every boast, every lie, every casual admission of fraud. The incident at the gate was a personal affront. But what happened at 30,000 feet was a corporate cancer. And it started, it seemed, with Marcus Thorne. Upon arrival, she was whisked through the private executive entrance to a top-floor conference room with a panoramic view of the bay. It was a room designed to impress, to project power. Today, it felt like an interrogation chamber. "Get me Marcus Thorne on a video call," she told David. "Now, and I want you to stay." David nodded, his expression grim. He understood this was no longer about a breach of airport etiquette. Within minutes, Marcus Thorne's face appeared on the 80-inch screen that dominated one wall. He was in his spacious office, a curated backdrop of awards and expensive art behind him. He looked tanned, relaxed, and confident. "Catherine, what a fantastic surprise!" He boomed his voice, oozing a practiced corporate charm. "I was expecting you tomorrow. Had I known, I would have rolled out the red carpet myself. Welcome to the team." Catherine did not smile back. She sat at the head of the long, polished table, her hands folded in front of her. "Marcus, we have a problem." Thorne's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, nothing serious, I hope. First day jitters. Two of your people, Liam Peters and Chloe Sterling, were on my flight from Denver." She began, her voice level. Marcus chuckled, relieved. "Ah, Liam and Chloe, my star players. They're heading up the integration presentation. Bright, ambitious kids. Did they talk your ear off about it? They can be a bit much, but their enthusiasm is their strength." "Their enthusiasm is not what I'd call it," Catherine said, her eyes boring into his image on the screen. "Let's talk about Project Chimera, Marcus." The name dropped into the room like a stone. Thorne's expression tightened. He shifted in his chair. "A critical R&D project, one of our most promising." "Indeed," Catherine continued. "So promising that I was surprised to learn from your star players that they think it's genius to shave 5% off the materials budget and reallocate it to consulting fees to make their numbers look good. Is that standard operating procedure here at Viridian, Marcus, falsifying R&D budgets on flagship projects?" The blood drained from Thorne's face. He was speechless. His confident posture crumbled. "They said that—" He finally managed his voice, a hoarse whisper. "They did," Catherine confirmed. "Loudly, in a cabin full of people. They also mentioned their plans for the Q3 projections you're presenting to my board next week. They seemed to be under the impression that you instructed them to use a set of optimistic figures, rather than the official, more conservative numbers from your own finance department. Their plan, as they articulated it, was to course correct in Q4, long after they'd secured their promotions, based on misleading our shareholders. Does that sound familiar to you?" Marcus Thorne looked like a man who had just seen the gallows being constructed outside his window. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He was trapped. Denying it would be his word against two of his direct reports. Admitting it would be career suicide. David Chen, standing silently by the wall, looked down at his shoes, his face a mask of disappointment in his superior. "Catherine, there may have been a miscommunication," Thorne stammered, sweat beading on his brow. "They're young, ambitious. Perhaps they misinterpreted a motivational directive to aim high." "Don't," Catherine said, her voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. "Do not insult my intelligence, Marcus. I have spent the last 2 hours listening to a detailed breakdown of the rot within your division. A rot that you have either cultivated or been willfully blind to. They weren't just arrogant at the gate. They were a reflection of a leadership culture that rewards deception and penalizes integrity." She leaned forward. "Liam and Chloe are on suspension. Their devices and files are being imaged by our forensics team as we speak. I have launched a full independent audit of Project Chimera and all departmental budgets under your purview going back 2 years. The presentation for next week is cancelled. You are to prepare a full, unvarnished and truthful report on the state of your division using only finance-approved data. You will present it to me and only me in 48 hours. Catherine, please—" He pleaded, his bravado gone, replaced by raw desperation. "I've been with this company for 20 years. We can fix this." "The fixing has already begun," Catherine stated coldly. "Your position as Executive Vice President is under review. Your future at this company is entirely dependent on the level of transparency and cooperation you demonstrate starting right now. The first lie, the first omission, and you will be terminated for cause. David will be my interim point of contact for the West Coast. Do you understand?" Marcus Thorne, the powerful EVP, the man who thought he could play the new owners for fools, could only nod his face, ashen. He looked like a ghost on the screen. Catherine made a sharp gesture to David, who ended the call, plunging the room back into silence. The view of the bay was still there, serene and beautiful, a stark contrast to the corporate carnage she had just initiated. "David," she said, turning to him, "get our auditors on a plane. I want them here by morning. I want to know how deep this goes." "Yes, Ms. Vance," he replied, his voice firm. The initial shock of the encounter had transformed into a clear mission. She wasn't just here to integrate a company. She was here to save it from itself. The reckoning had begun. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of controlled demolition. Catherine Vance, operating out of the top-floor conference room that had become her command center, was relentless. She was no longer just a CEO. She was a chief investigator, pulling at the loose threads Liam and Chloe had so carelessly handed her. And with every pull, the entire tapestry of Marcus Thorne's division began to unravel. The forensic imaging of the suspended employees' laptops was the first bombshell. The auditors found draft versions of the integration presentation, side by side with the optimistic version filled with inflated projections were the real numbers from the finance department. An internal messaging chat log between Liam and Chloe detailed their strategy explicitly, with multiple references to what Marcus wants them to see, and joking about how Ethelred is buying the sizzle, not the steak. It was a smoking gun, a digital confession of a conspiracy to defraud the parent company. Liam and Chloe were brought in for separate interviews with Catherine David and a senior lawyer from Ethelred's legal team. Their arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate self-preservation instinct. Chloe, seeing the evidence laid out against her, broke down completely. She admitted to everything, attempting to lay most of the blame on Liam and Marcus Thorne, painting herself as a reluctant participant caught up in an ambitious culture. Liam tried a different tactic. He attempted to bluster to frame the budget manipulations as creative accounting and the projection inflation as aspirational goal-setting. But under Catherine's cold, precise questioning, his arguments crumbled. When presented with the chat logs, he fell silent, his face pale. His termination was a foregone conclusion. Both he and Chloe were fired for gross misconduct and violation of their company's code of ethics, their careers in the tech industry effectively incinerated. The consulting fees from Project Chimera were traced to a shell company and flagged for criminal investigation. But Catherine's focus was on the source of the rot, Marcus Thorne. The audit she had launched was digging deeper. It turned out that Project Chimera was not an isolated incident. The auditors quickly uncovered a pattern. For years, Thorne had run his division like a personal fiefdom, encouraging his underlings to find deficiencies and hit aggressive targets by any means necessary. Budgets were padded and then saved to make managers look good. Sales numbers were booked before contracts were signed. Timelines for projects were shortened on paper to create the illusion of hyper-efficiency, leading to overworked teams and flawed products. It was a culture of lies built from the top down. Marcus Thorne had created an environment where the appearance of success was more important than actual success. He promoted people like Liam and Chloe, slick, ruthless, and morally flexible, while sidelining those who raised concerns. On the second day, Catherine received a call from a senior engineer on the Project Chimera team, a man named Robert Miller. He had heard about the audit and wanted to speak. He told Catherine he had tried to blow the whistle on the budget cuts to materials 6 months ago, warning that it would compromise the integrity of the new semiconductor. He sent his concerns in a detailed memo to Marcus Thorne. Thorne's response had been to remove Robert from a leadership role on the project, reassigning him to a dead-end legacy product and warning him that not being a team player was a fast track out of the company. Robert had kept a copy of the memo. He forwarded it to Catherine. This was the final nail in Marcus Thorne's coffin. It proved he hadn't just been willfully blind. He had actively suppressed dissent and knowingly endangered one of the company's most vital assets to protect his facade of success. When Catherine confronted him with the memo in their final meeting, Thorne had nothing left. The charm, the bluster, the desperate excuses. It was all gone. He sat across the table from her, a defeated, diminished man. "I built this division," he said quietly, his voice hollow. 20 years. "And what did you build, Marcus?" Catherine asked, her voice, devoid of triumph, filled only with a weary disappointment. "You built a house of cards. You fostered a culture where employees felt their best path to success was to lie. You punished honesty and rewarded deception. You took a company full of brilliant, innovative people and taught them that the only thing that mattered was hitting a fake number. The disrespect your employees showed me at the airport wasn't an anomaly. It was a perfect symptom of the disease you cultivated, the belief that they were above the rules because you had taught them that the rules didn't matter." Marcus Thorne was terminated that afternoon. His separation agreement was rescinded due to the findings of 4-cause termination, his lucrative golden parachute evaporating into thin air. News of his and his protégé's ousting sent a shockwave through Viridian Dynamics. In a company-wide town hall the next day, Catherine Vance addressed the employees of her new subsidiary for the first time. She didn't mention Liam Chloe or the incident at the airport. She didn't need to. She spoke about integrity, transparency, and a new chapter for the company. She announced she was promoting David Chen to interim head of the division, and that Robert Miller, the engineer, who had been punished for his honesty, was being put in charge of a newly funded and fully independent Project Chimera with an even larger budget than before. The message was clear and powerful. The old way of doing business was over. Honesty would be rewarded. Deceit would be excised. The era of fake success was at an end. She had come to San Francisco to oversee an integration, but she had ended up performing a necessary, painful, and ultimately cleansing surgery. 1 year later, the changes at Viridian Dynamics were palpable. Under the joint leadership of Catherine Vance from above and David Chen on the ground, the toxic culture of fear and deception was systematically dismantled. A new company-wide code of conduct was implemented with anonymous whistleblower channels that went directly to Ethelred's corporate counsel. Training on ethics and unconscious bias, inspired by Catherine's experience at the gate, became mandatory for all employees, from the mailroom to the executive suite. The company's performance, after an initial dip, as the real unvarnished numbers came to light, began to climb steadily. Freed from the pressure to lie, teams began to innovate again. Project Chimera, under Robert Miller's meticulous guidance, had a major breakthrough, and its new semiconductor was poised to dominate the market. Morale was higher than it had been in a decade. Viridian Dynamics was becoming the company Catherine had believed she was acquiring in the first place, a powerhouse of genuine talent and integrity. The fates of the architects of the old culture served as a lasting cautionary tale within the industry. Marcus Thorne, stripped of his severance, and with his reputation in tatters, found himself unemployable in Silicon Valley. The story of his downfall, while never officially detailed by the company, spread through the back channels of executive recruiters and venture capitalists. He was toxic. After months of failed attempts to find a similar role, he quietly sold his lavish Palo Alto home and moved out of state, taking a low-level consulting job for a no-name firm in a different industry. The man who once commanded a division of thousands was now just another name on a spreadsheet. Chloe Sterling tried to rebrand herself. She moved to a different city, changed her LinkedIn profile to obscure her time at Viridian, and attempted to start her own consulting business. But the tech world is small. The story followed her. Potential clients would perform their due diligence, hear the whispers of the scandal, and quietly back away. Her venture failed within a year, and she was last seen taking online courses for a complete career change, the sharp edges of her ambition worn down by failure and obscurity. Liam Peters faced the harshest outcome. The investigation into the consulting fees from Project Chimera had been turned over to the authorities. While the amount wasn't large enough to trigger a major federal case, the evidence of fraud was undeniable. He pleaded guilty to a lesser charge to avoid jail time, but he now had a criminal record. Blacklisted from any job requiring financial trust, he ended up working for a retail electronics chain, a job he had openly mocked others for having during his flight with Catherine. One afternoon, a junior Viridian employee on their lunch break saw him behind the counter, explaining the features of a new smartphone. Their eyes met for a fleeting second, a moment of recognition, humiliation, and the silent, crushing weight of a life derailed. He had once stood at the gate of power, sneering at a woman in a fleece jacket. Now he was just a man in a blue polo shirt, forever on the outside looking in. Catherine Vance rarely thought about them. They were footnotes in a much larger story of corporate renewal. Sometimes, however, when she was waiting to board a flight, she would see it, the flash of arrogance in a young executive's eyes, the dismissive glance at another passenger, the quiet performance of superiority. And she would be reminded of that day in Denver. She wasn't just a boss who had been slighted. She had been given a gift, a clear, unvarnished look at the truth of her own company. Liam and Chloe in their hubris had held up a mirror. She simply had the courage to look at what was reflected, and the power to change it. Their downfall wasn't an act of revenge. It was a simple, unavoidable market correction for a debt of character that had finally come due. 3 years had passed since the day that had become an infamous, unspoken legend within the halls of Ethelred Holdings and Viridian Dynamics. Catherine Vance was no longer just the CEO who had engineered a massive acquisition. She was the leader who had reshaped a culture. The story, in its sanitized, corporate-approved version, was often used as a case study in her business school guest lectures, a lesson on the importance of due diligence extending beyond financials and into the very character of a company. She was in Chicago on a brisk October afternoon, scheduled to give one such lecture at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. Her topic was, "The Integrity Quotient Why Character is Your Most Valuable Corporate Asset." Instead of heading directly to the faculty lounge, she had opted for a quiet hour to herself in a small, independent cafe a few blocks from campus. The place was filled with the gentle murmur of students and the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans. It was a world away from the sterile silence of boardrooms. Dressed in a simple cashmere sweater and slacks, she looked more like a visiting professor than a titan of industry. She was reviewing her notes, a half-empty cup of tea beside her, when a hesitant voice broke her concentration. "Excuse me. Ms. Vance." Catherine looked up. The man standing by her table was vaguely familiar, but stripped of the context and the armor she remembered it took her a moment to place him. The aggressive styled hair was gone, replaced by a shorter, simpler cut. The sharp-tailored suit was gone, replaced by a clean but well-worn button-down shirt and dark jeans. The arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of profound weariness and nervous apprehension. The years had etched lines of humility around his eyes. It was Liam Peters. A jolt went through Catherine, a reflexive tightening in her gut. It was the echo of an old battle, the muscle memory of a confrontation. She had never expected to see him again. Their worlds had diverged so completely, she assumed he had vanished into the anonymity of his new life. "Mr. Peters," she said, her voice, even and calm, betraying none of her internal surprise. She did not invite him to sit. He flinched slightly at the formality of his name, a reminder of the chasm between them. I saw you come in," he stammered, gesturing vaguely with his hands. "I work just down the street, at the financial advisory office. Just an entry-level analyst. It's a small firm." He seemed to feel an urgent need to define his new, diminished place in the world for her. "I see," Catherine replied, her gaze analytical. She was waiting for the angle. Was he going to ask for something? A recommendation? A second chance? Was this an appeal, but the request never came? Instead, he just stood there, looking profoundly uncomfortable. I know this is inappropriate, but I had to say something. I've replayed that day, the airport, the flight, 1,000 times in my head. He took a deep breath as if steeling himself. "I wanted to apologize," he said, and for the first time he made direct eye contact. His gaze wasn't challenging or demanding, it was simply open. Not for getting caught, and not just for being an arrogant jerk to you at the gate, for all of it. For the person I was, for the things we were doing. We were so lost in the game, we forgot it wasn't a game. Catherine remained silent, listening. This was not the man she had faced down in that SFO terminal. The bravado had been completely hollowed out. "For the first year," Liam continued, his voice low and earnest, "I hated you. I blamed you for everything. You were this faceless force that had ruined my life. I lost my job, my fiancé left me. My dad had to lend me money to avoid foreclosure. I took that retail job, and the humiliation was immense. I thought it was the worst thing that could have happened to me." He paused, a flicker of something new in his eyes, not bitterness, but clarity. But it wasn't. The worst thing would have been succeeding. If we had pulled off that presentation, we would have gotten our promotions. We would have kept climbing, kept lying, kept cutting corners. Sooner or later, the whole thing would have collapsed, and the damage would have been 100 times worse. Not just to the company, but to me. I have no idea what kind of man I would have become. Catherine felt her guarded posture relax slightly. This was not an act. The raw honesty in his confession was undeniable. She finally gestured to the empty chair opposite her. "Sit down, Mr. Peters." He did, perching on the edge of the seat, as if he might be asked to leave at any moment. "What changed?" Catherine asked, her tone softening from CEO to that of a curious observer. "My brother," Liam said. "He's a carpenter. He builds things, real things with his hands. He saw how miserable and angry I was, and one day he just said to me, 'You're mad because you got called out for building a crooked house. Be glad someone stopped you before you tried to live in it.' It was so simple, but it broke through all my self-pity." He looked down at his hands, which were no longer manicured, but looked like the hands of someone who did his own chores. "I started over. From the bottom. I took accounting classes at a community college at night. I learned the rules I used to think it was clever to break. The firm I'm with now, they value diligence. They value honesty. It's slow. It's not glamorous. But at the end of the day, the numbers are real. The work is real. I sleep better. There was a long silence between them, filled only by the cafe's gentle hum. Catherine thought about the lecture she was about to give. Her notes were filled with corporate theories and ethical frameworks, but here, sitting across from her, was the human embodiment of her entire thesis. I never took any pleasure in what happened to you, or to Chloe or Marcus, Catherine said finally. It was a painful but necessary correction. A company is not an abstract entity, Mr. Peters. It's a collection of people. Its culture is the sum of all their actions, good and bad. When the actions being rewarded are the bad ones, the entire structure is compromised. My responsibility was to the health of the whole, even if the cure was painful for some of the parts. I know that now, he said. You weren't just our boss's boss. You were a mirror. And we didn't like what we saw. He stood up, sensing the conversation had reached its natural end. Anyway, I'm sorry to have disturbed you. I needed to say thank you for stopping me. He offered a small, hesitant smile. Good luck with your lecture. With that, he turned and walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the flow of the city street, leaving Catherine alone with her thoughts. She looked at her notes at the bullet points about shareholder value and corporate responsibility. They suddenly seemed inadequate. The story wasn't about a clash of egos at an airport gate. It was about the divergent paths a life can take based on a single moment of reckoning. Her actions had sent Liam Peters on a path to ruin, but from those ruins he had been forced to build something more solid, more real. She put her notes away. She knew what she was going to talk about now. She would still discuss frameworks and ethics, but she would start with a story about two ambitious employees and a woman in a fleece jacket. A story not of revenge, but of reflection. A story that proved her lecture's central theme more powerfully than any chart or graph ever could, that integrity isn't just a corporate asset. It is the very foundation upon which a worthy life is built. And sometimes the most profound lessons come not from success, but from the humbling, painful, and ultimately redemptive grace of a second chance. That single moment at the boarding gate set off a chain reaction that didn't just cost two arrogant employees their jobs. It exposed a deep-seated rot that went all the way to the top. This story is a powerful reminder that character is what you do when you think no one important is watching. Liam and Chloe judged a person by her clothes, and in doing so sealed their own fate. Their condescension was just a symptom of a deeper corruption, and Catherine Vance wasn't just a boss, she was the cure. She didn't just fire them. She rebuilt an entire corporate culture based on the integrity they lacked. What do you think was their downfall deserved, or was Catherine's response too severe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story of poetic justice compelling, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more true life drama.